Have you ever wondered why, every time something finally starts to go right in your life, a part of you just sabotages it? Why, just when a relationship is getting more intimate, do you pull away? When work is going well, do you get sick? When life calls for courage, do you hesitate? No, it's not bad luck. It's not a lack of focus. It's not karma. What you call self-sabotage is actually a message, a whisper from the depths of your unconscious. And as an analyst of the human soul, I need to tell you, nothing in you is trying to destroy you. What's there is a wounded part trying to protect you, in its own way. But from what? That is the question that begins the analysis. You are not here by chance. If you have come to this video, something in you has recognized the pattern. Whenever something is good for you, a part of you starts to ruin everything. And that is not a coincidence, it is repetition. Because, in the language of the psyche, everything that repeats has a purpose. The unconscious mind works with repetitions from the past, trying in vain to rewrite a scene that marked you. And that, even today, secretly controls your life. But before we can talk about how to get out of this, we need to have the courage to see where it comes from. You see, when you were little, it wasn't enough just to live. You had to survive emotionally. And to do that, your psyche made choices. Some visible, like being obedient or playful. Others invisible, like avoiding standing out, not trusting, or not feeling too much pleasure. Yes, too much pleasure. Because perhaps, in your childhood, everything that seemed good was followed by pain. Love was followed by rejection. Achievement was followed by humiliation. Closeness was followed by abandonment. And then, without you realizing it, your mind created an internal logic. It's safer not to be happy, because too much happiness hurts. And you took that belief with you. You grew up with it hidden in the folds of your ego. And now, every time life starts to give you what you want, your unconscious triggers the alarm. Danger. This has gone wrong before. Let's protect ourselves. And protection is sabotage. This is how desire meets guilt. How impulse meets restraint. How the ID, that instinctive part that seeks pleasure, is sabotaged by the superego, that harsh judge formed by childhood prohibitions. And the ego, poor thing, tries to reconcile the two. But sometimes, the best way it can find is to ruin everything, because it's better to lose by choice than to repeat the trauma of being punished for joy. Do you understand now? Sabotage is a defense, a primitive mechanism to avoid greater pain. The pain of reliving what you don't even remember living, but your psyche remembers. As an analyst, I've seen it 1,000 times. Brilliant people who knew they were capable, but never got past almost. Relationships that had everything going for them, but died on the eve of real intimacy. Opportunities that appeared and disappeared right after a slip. The woman who falls in love with someone who doesn't want a commitment. The man who gives up on a project when he is about to be promoted. The artist who forgets the rehearsal for the most important audition of her life. None of this is chance. This is the return of the repressed. Yes, what you have repressed, your desires, your hurts, your fears, comes back. It always comes back, but it comes back in disguise, as a pattern, as a symptom, as sabotage. And if you don't listen, it screams. It screams in the form of anxiety, in the form of procrastination, in the form of choices that, deep down, you know will go wrong, but you repeat them anyway. Why? Because on some deep level, you've learned that it's better to hurt yourself your way than to risk being hurt by someone else. So you take control and sabotage. But that's not freedom. It's prison. And no matter how many goals you set, how many books you read, or how many courses you take, as long as you don't touch that pain, you will repeat yourself. Because the unconscious doesn't understand time. It only understands symbols. And every time life offers you something too good, your unconscious says, "This looks like what hurt me once. Better to destroy it now than be destroyed later." That's why I don't judge you. I don't blame you. Because I know you're just trying to survive your own history. But look, it's not enough to understand this intellectually. Healing isn't in knowing, it's in feeling. It's in letting what has been repressed come to the surface. And that takes courage. Courage to remember, to cry, to confront the inner voices that say you don't deserve it, that you'll ruin everything again, that it's better not to try, because those voices, they're not yours, they're echoes. They're introjections, bits of the voices of your parents, school, religion, culture, everything that shaped you before you could choose. But now, you can choose. You can choose to listen to the pain without letting it control you. You can choose to keep going, even when you're afraid. You can choose to be happy and deal with the guilt that comes with it. Because yes, there is guilt in pleasure. There is guilt in victory. There is guilt in love. And as long as that guilt remains unprocessed, it will sabotage you. But there is a way, a path that begins with the decision to stop running away, to start looking. Understand that all sabotage is a cry for help, and that behind the sabotage lies a part of you that wants, more than anything, to be accepted. And that is what I invite you to do. Accept. Sit with your pain as you would sit with a frightened child, not to scold them, but to say, "I am here, I see you, and I will protect you now." Because deep down, what you've always wanted is to feel safe enough to be happy. But maybe you still ask yourself, why do I sabotage the very thing I want most? Why does pleasure, which should be my guide, become a threat? This is one of the deepest questions of the human soul. And to answer it, we need to go even deeper. Imagine for a moment that inside you, there is a force that seeks pleasure, that wants touch, affection, fulfillment. It is the ID, that primitive, instinctual impulse that desires without censorship. But right next to it lives another force, the superego, the guardian of morality, the heir to the voices of childhood. It says, that's wrong. That's too much. That's dangerous. And in the middle of this duel is the ego, trying to mediate, trying to protect you, trying to keep you functional, trying not to go crazy. Now imagine that your id wants deep love, but the superego screams, "Love hurts, be careful." So the ego sabotages, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that if you allow too much, the old pain will come back with full force. Do you understand now? You don't sabotage what's good for you because you're weak. You sabotage because you've learned to associate good with pain, and that association isn't rational. It's emotional, visceral, unconscious. Maybe as a child, you were happy to see your father come home, but soon he would leave again. Perhaps you were enchanted by your mother's attention, but she soon disappeared, too busy, too tired, too hurt to look at you. So you learned, when you open your heart, it gets hurt. When joy comes, it will soon be taken away. And that lesson, that trauma, is recorded in your body, in your soul. Psychoanalysis calls this compulsion to repeat. You repeat it, not because you want to, but because your mind desperately seeks to master the trauma. You relive the scenario, unconsciously hoping to change the outcome. You put yourself back in the same play with different characters, hoping that this time you will be loved without being abandoned, seen without being ignored, chosen without being discarded. But the trauma repeats itself. It cannot be repaired. And then, from repeating it so many times, you get tired. You get frustrated. You blame yourself. You tell yourself that you are weak, that you can't do it, that you are sabotaging yourself. And you don't see that behind this sabotage, there is a child who is afraid. A child who needs, above all else, to be understood. You see, every part of you that blocks you today once saved you. The fear of trusting protected you from disappointment. The fear of shining spared you from envy. The fear of loving kept you safe. But today, those same fears are preventing you from living. And it's not enough to fight them. You have to listen to them, because the unconscious cannot be convinced by arguments. It is transformed by listening. That is why, in analysis, healing does not come from logical explanation, but from emotional memory. When you feel, again, what shaped you, when you give it a name, when you cry, when you allow the pain to leave your body and gain language, then yes, something begins to change. That's when the symptom begins to lose its function. Sabotage is no longer necessary, because the part of you that was causing the boycott has finally been heard. But I know there's a part of you that wants to run away. That says you don't have time for this, that it's better to distract yourself, that you just need to think positive, that everything will work out with focus and discipline. That part is your defense. And the function of defense is to prevent collapse. Because if you saw, all at once, all the pain you carry, you might not be able to handle it. That's why the unconscious releases it little by little. That's why analysis is slow. That's why healing is a process, not a miracle. But know this, if you are already hearing this now, it is because you are ready to see a little more. And every time you see, you free yourself. Not because the pain disappears, but because you are no longer held hostage by it. You stop living on autopilot. You stop repeating the same pattern. You stop sabotaging everything that is good for you. It is at this point in the journey that many retreat, because it is easier to repeat than to transform. Easier to blame the world than to look within. Easier to say, that's life, than to look in the mirror and see that life is like this, because you have not yet embraced what dwells within you. But you can choose differently. You can choose not to run away. Not anymore. Can choose to see the symptom as a sign, sabotage as a letter, anxiety as a messenger, because everything you feel has meaning. And when you understand the meaning, you begin to have power, the power to choose, to say yes without guilt, to say no without fear, to get closer to what nourishes you, to move away from what consumes you, to recognize, finally, that happiness is not dangerous. The danger lies in avoiding it. But there is one last trap, guilt. Guilt. That shadow that accompanies every pleasure. As if living well were betraying your parents' pain. As if being happy were unfair to those who have suffered. As if achieving were arrogance. As if loving were too dangerous. That guilt, it's not yours. It's inherited. It's internalized. It's a psychological legacy that you can choose not to carry anymore. But to do that, you have to recognize that you no longer need to pay the price for a past you didn't choose. You can allow the good to remain. Allow the joy to stay. Allow love to grow. Yes, at first, it will hurt, because the good that remains also touches the wound from which it was once taken. But if you endure this pain, if you make it through this journey, something new is born, a new you, a you capable of loving without hiding, of growing without punishing yourself, of being happy, without sabotaging yourself. You are still here. That tells me something important. There is a part of you that no longer wants to run away, a part that is tired of living at war with itself. And that part, that fragment of yourself that resists sabotage, is the key to transformation. But be careful. Just because you are ready does not mean that your unconscious will give in right away. The unconscious does not obey will. It obeys repetition. And each repetition contains an invisible loyalty. Yes, loyalty. Many people sabotage their success because somewhere in the dark recesses of their minds, they have associated suffering with belonging. If I'm too happy, maybe my mother will reject me. If I grow too tall, my father will envy me. If I stand out, I'll be punished like I was at school. And so you remain trapped in suffering, out of love, distorted love, but love. Nonetheless, childish love, love that says, I'd rather suffer together than be happy alone. Love that is confused with guilt, that turns joy into a threat. That makes failure a test of loyalty. This love needs to be seen and released, because as long as you love through pain, you will sabotage everything that takes you away from it. And believe me, pleasure is also scary. Not the immediate, impulsive pleasure, but the kind that touches your core. The kind that reveals that, perhaps, you are entitled to lightness. And that, for those who have been taught that everything must. Hurt is unbearable. There are patients who, when they start to get better, get sick. Who, when they experience happy days, fall into crisis. Who, after meaningful encounters, spiral into guilt and self-deprecation. Why? Because the psyche, accustomed to suffering, rejects novelty as if it were a foreign body. Well-being becomes dissonant with the self. And then, the return to the familiar, to the symptom, to chaos, to anguish, is experienced as relief. But this is not relief. It is a prison decorated with familiarity. Freud called this the return of the repressed. What is excluded from consciousness because it is painful, inappropriate, or forbidden does not disappear. It returns, but it returns in disguise, in the form of symptoms, patterns, strange dreams. And sabotage is one of these returns. It is old content masked as a decision. You think you are choosing to make a mistake. But in fact, you are obeying something you don't remember learning. Want an example? Think of that woman who always attracts partners who make her feel small. She says men are no good. But deep down, she is unconsciously seeking to repeat the relationship she had with an absent or devaluing father. She is trying once again to be loved by someone who never loved her, as if the next attempt could erase the pain of childhood. Think about that man who gives up whenever he is close to achieving something. He says, I'm afraid of success. But in reality, he carries the mark of a childhood in which being too good led to jealousy, punishment, or abandonment. For this man, winning is a risk, because victory carries the specter of punishment. And what irony! These patterns seem like character flaws, but they are only echoes of unfinished stories. The unconscious tries to finish what was left unfinished. You sabotage today by trying to solve yesterday. And that is the greatest deception of the psyche, thinking that healing lies in repetition. But healing lies in remembering and transforming. That's why dreams are so revealing. In them, your defenses are down, and repressed content emerges, often in symbolic forms: an elevator that falls, a room with no exit, a train that leaves without you. Dreams in which you lose something valuable, in which you try to speak and no one hears you. These dreams are not random. They are messages. Messages from the unconscious, warning you that something inside you is still stuck, still repeating itself, still suffering. And sometimes the dream is clearer. You dream of a childhood you don't even remember, of a house that no longer exists, of a distant mother, an absent father, silent abandonment. The dream brings to the surface what your consciousness has tried to forget, but what your soul has never overcome. So when you sabotage yourself, you're not doing anything wrong. You're daydreaming. You're acting under the command of an old script, written by a frightened child. But there's something that child didn't know, and that you, today, can know. The past doesn't have to define your destiny. The pain was real. But it doesn't have to be eternal. And if you're here, still listening, it's because part of you already knows this. You already sense that it's possible to live without punishing yourself. That it's possible to love without disappearing. That it's possible to be successful without losing yourself. But be careful. Don't confuse healing with control. Healing is not about becoming invulnerable. It's about becoming whole. It's not about eliminating pain. It's about integrating it. It's not about never making mistakes. Again, it's about knowing why you make mistakes. From then on, you are no longer tossed about by the winds of the unconscious. You begin to navigate, even in the midst of storms. And do you know what else changes? Your relationship with pleasure. You begin to tolerate lightness, to endure joy, to allow the good to stay, to allow love to remain, to allow success to inhabit you without being followed by sabotage. Because by giving space to old pain, you no longer need to repeat it. By listening to the symptom, it no longer needs to scream. This is where analysis becomes liberating, because it doesn't promise you a life without problems. But it gives you something much more valuable, a life without unconscious repetitions. And that, my friend, is freedom. Perhaps now you are beginning to see. Sabotage was never your enemy. It was a cry in disguise, a plea to be heard, a desperate attempt by your psyche to protect you from what it still believes to be unbearable. But the truth is that you are no longer that child. And that changes everything. Yes, you still carry your scars, but now you have a choice. You can choose to step out of the position of the repeater and take the position of the one who understands, of the one who looks inward not to judge, but to welcome, of the one who stops blaming themselves for failing and starts asking, what in me is still trying to survive? That's what analysis does. It replaces blame with understanding, judgment with compassion, blind repetition with a consciousness that liberates. But don't be fooled. This process is painful because it requires you to abandon the emotional crutches that have sustained your life until now. It requires you to look at the mother who didn't know how to love you, at the father who didn't know how to protect you, at the teachers who belittled you, at the silences that screamed at you, at the looks that said, don't be too much. Don't shine. Don't bother us. And above all, it requires you to look at the version of yourself that believed all of this. This is perhaps the greatest pain, realizing that you believed it, that you accepted it, that you shaped your life to fit expectations that were never yours, that you molded yourself to be kind, even if it meant abandoning yourself. But there is good news. You can redeem yourself, and the first step in that rescue is to recognize that your sabotage is not failure, it is loyalty. Loyalty to a version of yourself that just wanted to be loved. That, to achieve this, accepted crumbs, silenced desires, erased wishes. And now, every time that desire tries to return, that part reacts. It reacts with fear, with anxiety, with sabotage. But this reaction no longer has to control your life. You can acknowledge the fear without being dominated by it. You can embrace the pain without being consumed by it. You can say, I see you. I understand why you did that. But now, I'm the one who decides. This I is what Freud called the strengthened ego, an ego that, far from eliminating the ID or the superego, learns to mediate between the two. It learns to recognize desire and to negotiate with morality. It learns to build possible paths, paths where pleasure is allowed, where success is assured, where love doesn't have to hurt. But this only happens when you break the cycle of repression, when you stop pushing pain into the basement of your unconscious and start listening to it. Because everything that is repressed comes back always, and the more repressed, the more disguised, in patterns, in illnesses, in sabotage. That's why you repeat it, because what was rejected by the conscious mind comes back disguised as a choice. But in reality, it's not a choice, it's a compulsion. Freud observed this in dreams. The manifest content, what you remember, is just the tip of the iceberg. The real message of the dream lies in the latent content, what it hides. And the same goes for your behaviors. Conscious choices, changing jobs, ending a relationship, giving up on a project, and hide unconscious content. Fear of growing up, fear of loving, fear of being seen. So if you want to stop sabotaging yourself, you need to stop explaining yourself. Because explanations are rational, and the unconscious is not logical. It is symbolic. It speaks through images, sensations, repetitions. It does not respond to goals. It responds to emotions. Want an example? That sudden urge to disappear? At the height of a relationship may not be fear of the other person, but fear of what love reveals in you. Because true love exposes you. It touches your vulnerability, your emotional nakedness. It puts you face to face with a part of yourself that you have learned to hide. And then, to protect yourself, you run away. You say it's intuition, but it's not. It's fear. Fear of the return of what you thought you had already overcome. But look, the fact that you feel fear does not mean you should retreat. It means you have reached the limit of your wound. And that, if you can bear to cross that line, something new will emerge. Yes, it will hurt, but it will be a different kind of pain, the pain of childbirth, because something in you will be born, a more complete self, a self capable of enduring the good, of sustaining pleasure, of no longer ruining everything when it finally starts to work out. And that, my friend, is revolution. This is what psychoanalysis is all about. Not eliminating symptoms, but listening to what they have to say. Deciphering the secret language of the soul. Translating sabotage into cries for help. Symptoms into symbols. Repetition into rediscovery. Because deep down, what sabotage wants is to be seen. It wants to be named. It wants to be understood. When that happens, it no longer needs to exist. Because it has fulfilled its function. To protect you until you could. Protect yourself, and you can. But you need to choose to step out of the position of victim of your own story. You need to abandon the comfort, it's stronger than me. You need to take the risk of living with awareness, of loving with presence, of working with pleasure, of existing with wholeness, and above all, you need to claim your right to be happy. Because yes, it takes courage to be happy, to stop sabotaging yourself, to sustain the good without guilt, to accept that the past shaped you, but it doesn't define you. You are more than your trauma, more than your symptoms, more than repetition. You are the one who can choose for the first time not to repeat. You've made it this far. That alone is a break from the pattern. The mind that sabotages itself doesn't usually have patience for the truth. It runs away. It gets distracted. It gives up halfway through the process. But you stayed. And that tells me something. A part of you is ready to stop running away. It's ready to remember, to feel, to finally live. Yes, live. Because until now, what you called life was, in many moments, a management of fear, a control of pain, an emotional juggling act to avoid touching the wound. But real life, the one that pulses, burns, vibrates, begins when you stop avoiding yourself. And now is the time to look back, not to blame yourself, but to rescue. To look at the moments when pleasure arrived and you walked away, the encounters that had everything to blossom, but you wilted, the opportunities that seemed right, until you took that wrong step that canceled everything out. Those steps were never wrong. They were faithful. Faithful to an old self who thought you couldn't do it, who didn't deserve it, who would get hurt if you dared to be happy. But now, that loyalty needs to shift. Instead of remaining loyal to pain, absence, inherited guilt, you can choose to be loyal to yourself. Yes, it's scary, because the new is scary. Pleasure is scary. Likeness is scary. There are patients who, when they experience days that are too good, become ill. It's as if their body is saying, "This isn't right for me." But this is just a reflection of how much trauma has shaped their references. If suffering has become home, joy seems threatening. If pain has become identity, healing seems like death. And that's why so many sabotage themselves. Because being happy requires letting go of your old identity. It requires burying versions of yourself that survived by hiding, by keeping quiet, by erasing yourself. And yes, there is grief in that. There is pain in letting go of the self that kept you alive. To be reborn as the self that can finally live. But it is this journey that heals. And like every journey, it requires courage. The courage to sustain joy without imploding. To receive love without running away. To remain steadfast without losing yourself in guilt. To stop apologizing for being whole. That is the turning point. When you understand that happiness also needs to be sustained. That pleasure needs to be allowed. That success needs to be digested. And that you are entitled, yes, entitled to all of it. Not as a reward, but as reparation. Reparation for a story that taught you to expect punishment where there should be celebration. That trained you for failure as a form of belonging. That made pain a constant companion and joy, a suspicious visitor. But now you know. You can build a new psychic home. A place where pleasure is not scary, where love does not hurt, where success does not isolate, where you no longer have to choose between being loved and being true. That home begins within. It begins when you stop running and sit with yourself. When you listen to your pain without rushing. When you welcome your fear without judgment. When you say to yourself firmly, "I will not abandon myself anymore." This is the end of sabotage, the reunion. When the adult self finds the wounded self and says, "I'll take care of you now," you can rest. And as you rest, that part of you that only knew how to protect itself begins to trust. Sabotage dissolves. Because protection is no longer necessary. But make no mistake, this process is not linear. You will still slip up. You will still feel fear. You will still want to run away. But now, something has changed. You know it. And knowing changes everything. Because what was once automatic is now conscious. What was once standard is now a choice. And with each conscious choice, a layer of the old self falls away. A new psychic structure is built. Stronger, freer, more yours. And at this point, I need to tell you, freedom hurts. Because being free means losing your excuses. It means no longer being able to blame the past, others, or fate. It means humbly and firmly accepting. Now I am the one who decides. And what do you decide? You can decide to go back to the old ways. Repeat. Sabotage yourself again. Make everything fall apart when it starts to work. Because yes, that is still an option. But now, a new possibility also exists. To move forward. To sustain. To maintain. To remain when everything in you wants to disappear. To choose good when evil seems more familiar. To stay when your impulse is to run away. That is your job now. Not with force, but with presence, with listening. With truth. And if I can give you one last piece of advice, it is this. Don't try to do it alone. Because alone, that's how you learn to survive. But together, that's how you can learn to live. Find someone who can listen to you without judging you. A therapist, a counselor, A space where your story can be told without haste, without masks. Because what is not said is repeated, and what is heard is transformed. And if something in this video touched you, disturbed you, revealed something to you, speak up. Share in the comments. Say what you recognized in yourself. Give voice to the part of you that wants to be heard. Because when you write, you symbolize. And the unconscious needs symbols to transform. I'll be here, reading, following, responding when possible. Not as a guru, but as someone who, like you, has also gone through pain to find the truth. The difference is that now, you can too. So tell me, are you ready to stop sabotaging everything that is good for you? If so, the analysis begins now. Leave your comment. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this. And remember, it's not about fixing what's broken. It's about understanding what, inside you, is still trying to survive. And maybe, for the first time, choose to truly live.